accept the impossible. So this whole month, if you have not been here, this whole month, it's been a real tongue-twisting month, as Lisa Renee would say, with the striving strategies. Our whole theme has been based on 3 modes in which we are operating. And we have gone into great detail about each one of these modes and how to identify them when we're in them and what the functioning is. Because a lot of times if we're not aware, we really don't know how to identify what we're in. We just know it doesn't feel right. So we have the surviving mode. And in the surviving mode, life happens to me. Okay, so we're in victim consciousness there. Then we have the striving mode, which is where life happens by me. So this is where we make things happen. We make them happen because we know the best. So that's the striving. So that's one. And then the third one, which we have yet to get to, I can't wait for next week, is the thriving mode. And the thriving mode is when life happens as me and through me. So that is when it really feels great, when we're really flourishing, when we're really prospering, when we're really at peace and in love with ourselves. Now, we can go in and out of all 3 of these modes. But usually, once we've experienced the thriving mode, the other 2 don't last that long. Because we remember, see, we're aware, we wake up when we get to because the thing that's moving in and through me is the divine presence. And so we've made room for God. See, in the other 2 modes of operating, surviving and striving, there's very little room for a higher power to move through. In fact, it can't. It gets stuck by our energy blocks. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about thriving and a few other things. So thriving is being the vehicle through which God fully expresses, where we really allow that divine presence to flow through us, as us, to experience our infinite potential, because we have infinite potential that we might not even be aware of. And to live a life in a state of fulfillment, of joy, of freedom, to be free to choose, and to then actually follow that. And so then we have this state of well-being, where everything just feels right. That is thriving. That is thriving. So once we rise above our striving strategies, which we really went into great detail about 2 weeks ago, and once we've experienced the freedom of true surrender, which we spoke of last week, then we are ready to move into that place of creating that which maybe before seemed impossible. I talk a lot about impossibility and possibility this morning. So the question of the morning is, are you willing to accept the possibility that the impossible might be possible? Yes. You speak it out. Yes. That was a question. That's the question I'm posing this morning. I've told you before, that's why I have June sitting in the front. Very active. Yes. We often quote scripture where we say, with God, all things are possible. We say that a lot. With God, all things are possible. And I ask you, how much of that do you really believe? Because we have a lot of wonderful affirmations, we have wonderful phrases, but do we believe what we're saying?
Yes.
So are you willing to say and mean the words, with God, all things are possible? Or better yet, through God, all things are possible. That's even better. And better still, as God, all things are possible. That's the most powerful, as God. Remember, we're the vehicle through which this divine presence is moving through when we're in that thriving mode of operating. That's really powerful. Are you willing to accept the possibility that this is really true? These are questions we can ask ourselves. You know, how much of this teaching are we really believing? Are we really practicing? Are we really using? How much of it? So the words sound nice and they ring true. But when we leave this room, let's take them with us and really utilize. Let's use them. Or will you be like the disbelieving priest who was stopped by a police officer for speeding? The police officer immediately noticed the smell of alcohol on this man's breath, on the priest's breath, and he noticed that there was a bottle of wine on the floor. He asked, "Sir, have you been drinking?" And the priest replied, "Just water, officer." "Then why do I smell wine?" the officer asks. The minister looked down at the bottle and in utter disbelief said, "Good Lord, he's done it again." Henry Ford once said, "I am looking for a lot of men who have an infinite capacity to not know what can't be done." In the past few weeks, we have been preparing to have this infinite capacity to not know what can't be done. And last week we hit upon 3 points in surrendering, which we always have to do. And those 3 points were: life does not turn out the way it should. Life does not turn out the way it shouldn't. Life simply turns out the way it turns out. We discussed that accepting that you can't control the outcome is not the end. In fact, it's the exact opposite. We went into a lot of detail on that surrender of the should and should nots last week. So the fact is the opposite. It's the point. It's that point where the pure potentiality can come forth. We realize we can't control the end anyway. Can we control life? Every single thing that happens? Usually not. So then, I say, why don't you just step up, step out, go for it, experience what your heart is pulling you to do. Go for it. Step out of that box you might be in, if you're in a box. The work we have done in the previous 3 weeks sets us up for today and for next week when we end this series. So why was it important to do all of this building up? Why couldn't we just jump into creating the impossible? The universe works through a divine law, which, to use Ernest Holmes' words, takes the direct impress of our thoughts and acts upon it. Remember, it goes into law, goes into universal law, and comes back as experience. So why didn't we just go right to it? Because it is our job to give that law clear direction. The work of the past few weeks has been like, has been like clearing the forest so that we have a clean pathway to create the impossible, that which seems impossible. So we have to give the law clear directions. We put a mixed message out there. What are we going to get back? A lot of confusion. Stuff doesn't happen. We don't demonstrate. We don't manifest. We could say in the last few weeks that we have laid the foundation of our consciousness, our awareness, from which we have the capacity to move from the seeming impossible into the possible. We've laid this foundation with exact steps to lead us to a place of clear thinking, of really knowing the divine order that the universe operates in. And this idea makes me think of the words of the master teacher, Jesus, when he said, as part of what would now become his Sermon on the Mount, he said, anyone who hears my words and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rains descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. And it fell, and the fall was great. But whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. That's from Matthew chapter 7. And so then Ernest Holmes, who just loves the Bible, in Science of Mind textbook, writes, in reference to this passage, the wise man built his house on the solid rock of truth. And that's where, with God, all things are possible. Not on the shifting sands of instability. The foolish man, he says, living only in a sense perception, that's our striving strategies, where we think things should be a certain way, has no measure for reality and builds his home on false opinion and erroneous concepts. The vicissitudes of fortune upset his frail building. The storms of experience tear the walls apart. While the edifice falls around him, the truth alone endures to the eternal day. So he is comparing this house built on the rock to our lives built on a strong consciousness of truth, spiritual truth. No matter what takes place in life, if we are firmly rooted and planted with a strong belief system of faith in that higher power, then we will stand up against all those experiences. They won't destroy us. They won't bring us down. They might make us sway a little, but we will be rooted and anchored in that truth. So after having built our strong foundation on truth, we can take a stand for the impossible. We just think